When I was about 8 years old, I handed my mom a very detailed plan. You know it was detailed because it was drawn out in magic marker. This plan was my whole future on one sheet of paper. I drew in the middle of it a giant house, and I explained to her that this house was going to be mine. I was going to earn a lot of money, and I was going to build a mansion. And down the same street of this giant mansion that I drew was other two nice houses, but not quite as big as my house, of course, which I explained to her was going to be where she and Dad lived, and then my sister and whoever her husband would live. I was planning at 8 years old a family compound, and I was going to pay for it all. I still remember being very disappointed in her skepticism, as if I couldn't pull that off. But she thought it was cute and she thought it was nice. Of course, my sister never got married, so already the plans are kind of broken and destroyed, right? But my goal was to build, to have. And why was it that I had these dreams of such incredible grandeur? Why did I want so much? Why was this so important to me at 8 years old? The answer probably lies in the fact that I lived in military housing and my friends lived in bigger houses and they had Super Nintendos and Sega Genesis, and I wanted to be more like them, to have permanence and nice things rather than being so transient. But these thoughts of jealousy and longing and riches can begin in our hearts and minds at very, very young ages. We are trained and formed at a very young age to become jealous and to want more and to acquire more and to become richer and richer and richer. In fact, these thoughts probably were the most pervasive thoughts that I had as a child. How am I going to get rich? I want to tell you the story about someone who got fabulously wealthy and how fleeting that wealth can be. You know this person. His name is Vanderbilt. Cornelius Vanderbilt. The university in Nashville, Tennessee is named after him, Vanderbilt University. He was the Commodore, which is why their football team is the Commodores. When he died in 1877, he was worth $105 million, which in today's money is $3.1 billion. He was one of the wealthiest people the world had ever seen. And when he died with this much money, he had 10 children. And he decided not in his will to give this equally to all of his children. Instead, he passed on $95 million of it to one kid. And the rest he split up between the others. When he died, in spite of having all this money to pass on to his family, a doctor came to him and saw him in his incredible ill state. And he didn't understand or appreciate how wealthy he was. He still saw himself as poor. Because while he was dying and incredible pain from many diseases started to come to the front, a doctor said to him that he should drink some champagne for the pain. I can't imagine a doctor in today's world coming to you and saying, "You look like you're in a lot of pain. Why don't you have some light alcohol to solve that problem?" But this was the 1800s. And Cornelius Vanderbilt's response was, "Wouldn't soda water do?" Because he didn't think he had enough money to drink champagne in spite of the fact that he was worth $105 million that he was about to pass on. His oldest son received $95 million of it. The rest of it was split. The other 5% or so was split between 10 other kids, including all of the women getting about $100,000 or $200,000, whereas his oldest son got $95 million. This turned into, as you might imagine, a massive lawsuit where the younger kids sued the older brother saying that he had manipulated dad to get all of the money. It didn't work. The oldest son inherited most of the money. And he was pretty good with money. His name was Billy Vanderbilt. He was given about $100 million or so, and he only lives 8 years longer than his dad. However, he doubled the money that his dad had given him in just 8 years. There's some incredible stories about this guy. If you were to ever, like I love getting in little Wikipedia holes There's some Wikipedia holes about Billy Vanderbilt, my favorite of which was that he lent money to Ulysses S. Grant, like the President of the United States, who put it into what was essentially a Ponzi scheme, and he lost like $150,000. Ulysses S. Grant lost $150,000 of this guy's money. And in order to make it back, because the president didn't have it, the former president didn't have it, he went to Billy Vanderbilt and traded him some of his Civil War swords in order to make restitution for this lost money. What a scene that must have been. Well, anyways, Billy Vanderbilt doubles the money. The family is now worth $200 million, which in today's money is getting close to $6 or $7 billion. This family is incredibly wealthy. And Billy Vanderbilt has multiple kids. And he decides to hand that money down to his kids, a little bit more spread out than before, but not entirely so, to the point that his youngest of children gets about $3, $4, $5 million of this $200 million. And his youngest son, you have heard of. You know of him, because the youngest son took that few million dollars and built the largest house in American history, the Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina. Now, when you are given a few million dollars, you can absolutely choose to spend that money on a house. You could take all of it and build the biggest house the United States of America has ever seen and not go into a red cent of debt because you have cash to pay for the beautiful lawns and the opulent bathrooms and the wonderful, gorgeous bedrooms. You can do that, right? The problem is this youngest son, upon receiving these few million dollars and spending it all on building the biggest house America has ever seen, it did not occur to him that it was going to cost $300,000 a month to run this house. And as much as $3 million might be, that's only a few months of running the house before you're completely and utterly broke. And so Billy Vanderbilt dies with $200 million in the late 1800s. He passes it on to his children who do not have his financial sense. This is the most famous example of spending the money, but all of the children struggle with financial responsibility. So if you fast forward just about 100 years, in the year, I think, 1973, at Vanderbilt University, the university invited all living descendants of Cornelius Vanderbilt to gather together. It has not been 100 years since Cornelius Vanderbilt has died. Cornelius died with $100 million. His son died with $200 million. And at this very famous meeting of all of the Vanderbilt descendants, they gather together in press corps. People want to write stories about it, and they get there and they find out the most interesting fact that you could possibly imagine. Not one person in the family gathered there that day was worth even $1 million. There wasn't a single millionaire in the entire family less than 100 years later. Now, you might know that there are some Vanderbilts who have figured it out. Gloria Vanderbilt, for example, Anderson Cooper, who's on CNN. They have money. Some parts of the family has figured it out. But that day, the people who had directly inherited the money of Cornelius Vanderbilt, they had spent all of it to the point that not any of them were even a millionaire anymore. Riches are fleeting. We long, we build our lives, we pick careers based on our desire for riches. But it can come and it can go so easily. James, in chapter 5, which we're going to start reading today, we've been reading James together all summer. He can be kind of in your face and tough, and this chapter is no differently. And here he calls out the wealthy, and he demands something of them. He calls them to something. And it's important for us to take seriously what the Bible wants us to see and to think and to believe and to be in light of a world where people are chasing wealth, where we want to chase wealth so often, if we're honest. And James has harsh words today, But we're going to sit with them together, and we're going to see what it might call us as Christian people in the year 2025 to be and to do in our relationship to money. So I'm going to invite you, if you would, to stand with me as we read James chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. Now listen, you rich people. With that kind of tone, nice stuff doesn't usually come behind. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. Whew. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Be patient then, dear brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. This does take a turn eventually, kind of calms down, but it starts out with pretty harsh language, scary language, that those who are wealthy might have their wealth consume them. The Bible, as you know, has a lot to say about wealth, and it can often be very tough on wealth. It calls out wealth over and over and over, which then begs the question, am I wealthy? Are they talking about me? Am I the one who needs to sit back and really sit under this? And I would say to you that I think that the answer to that question is kind of difficult. Am I wealthy or am I not? There's evidence for both directions for all of us. Charles Schwab, in 2024, did a modern wealth survey, and they asked people, how much money would make you wealthy? How much would you need in order to be wealthy? And the average answer was $2.5 million. That if you had $2.5 million, that's the point at which you are wealthy. They also found that in America, the average household is worth $1 million. Now that's surprising. Does that surprise you? That surprised me. The average household is a millionaire in the United States of America. But here's the piece that really begins to shock us if we understand our math. The median household is $192,900. That means the most middle person in America, if you stacked up every household from poorest to wealthiest, the very middle of it is $192,000. But the top end of wealth is so extreme that it pulls the average from the median to $1 million. The truth is that $2.5 million does make you very wealthy. If you have $2.5 million, you are in the 2% wealthiest in America. And the top 10% is worth $970,000, which means the 10th percentile is just about the same as the average, meaning the top 10% own about half of the wealth in America. Now, many of us might look at that and say, well, I'm not close to that, so clearly I'm not wealthy. But if we look at the context of the entire world, not just America, we begin to look very wealthy. Only 38% of households in the entire world own a car. And so if you own one car, you're in the top third richest in America, if your family owns a car. This doesn't even consider that most of us own 2 cars or 3 cars. But just if your household has 1 car, it puts you in the 1/3 wealthiest in the world. I also learned that the bottom half of the world's population only owns 2% of the world's wealth, meaning that most likely all of us in this room are at least in the top 50% of wealthiest in the world. If you break down the wealth distribution of the United States, you've probably seen this sort of thing. The top 20% of Americans own 77% of wealth. The middle class, which you would think should be the most robust number of people, own 21% of wealth, and the bottom 20% own about 2% of wealth. And so on the other side of those statistics, what is your answer? Are you a wealthy person? I'm sure the answer remains complicated and complex. It is possible that this text is talking to someone who is wealthier than you. It is possible that you can sit back and say, all right, I'm scot-free, I don't have enough money for that to be dealing with me. There does seem to be a sense in this text that they're talking about people who own businesses and have employees and are cheating their employees in order to make their own wealth. And for many of us, that's not the case. Many of us, we draw a nice salary. We work as a part of a cog in a system. And so we're not quite that person. However, at the same time, we've got to be honest about the fact that if we live in the United States of America, we are doing very well, even if we're struggling here. Even a struggle in the United States of America makes us wealthier than many people who live around the world. Many of you know or saw that I went to Europe a couple weeks ago, and one of the places I went to was Versailles, which is right outside of Paris, and it's traditionally where the King of France lived, particularly where the King of France hid whenever the French people were mad at them. And it was this massive house. And as I was walking through this house and seeing these giant bedrooms that the king and the queen used to live in, I would think to myself in the back of my mind, as wealthy as they were in, say, the 1700s, and as giant as this house is, was their life better than my life as a middle-class person today? I wondered about this a lot because you know what? King Louis never once opened up his cell phone and got Taco Bell delivered to his couch for him. He never did that. And just by touching a few buttons, I could have a cheesy gordita crunch for just a few dollars. King Louis wishes. There's a way in which that if we're honest, the middle-class lifestyle that most of us are a part of today is better than the kings and the queens of yesteryear experienced. We're a royalty of our own strange building in accord. And so it is probably worth us taking a moment and really auditing our relationship to money. Are we in a healthy relationship with wealth and money? Are we honoring Jesus with the way that we receive and we spend, the way that we save and the way that we give? Are we living with money the way that Jesus would be honored? This question, especially for a marginally affluent people, is worth us sitting under for just one moment. And so I'm going to kind of end out here with a series of questions and maybe a couple of suggestions of how we might posture ourselves well as a Christian people in light of the economic situation that we find ourselves in. And so first, I've got 3 questions for you that are worth sitting with, I think. Are there people who are praying to God for help because what you have done? Are there people that you've not paid back? Are there people that you have jumped ahead of in line? Are there people that you have ignored that you could have helped? Are there people who which you could be the answer to prayer for them because they're struggling with money? Is there something that you're ignoring, something you're not doing that could be salvific, that could be helpful, that could be transformative to someone else because of the way you're spending money? The next question I have for you to sit with is, are you rooting for people who are profiting off other people? Now, I wrote that because this has been me in my life. I have, at many points in my life, opened up the Forbes 500 list and thought, yes, Bill Gates made another $5 billion this year. I'm very competitive. And so I have read that list at different points in my life as if it were the standings of my football team. Seeing people's wealth go up and up and up and thinking they are killing it. How awesome is that? And rooting for them. But this is how out of hand it has gotten. I logged on to Forbes this morning, Sunday morning, to check out what they were talking about on an off day, on a weekend. And one of the things that I saw on there was, quote, today's winners and losers, end quote. And it had a list of 3 people who had made hundreds of millions of dollars today, including one person who was up $403 million today. And then it had a list of 3 people that it called losers, one of which had lost $140 million today. They're tracing people's victory and devastation and publishing it for the world to root for or to root against. Why should I care if someone whose name, I don't even recognize these people's names, but why is it of interest to me or anyone to log on to Forbes and to see that there are people who are profiting so extremely and there are people who are being devastated at the same time? So do we root for people who are profiting off other people? Many people who are among the wealthiest among us often are winning because other people are losing. And when we celebrate that, we're participating in an economic system that doesn't necessarily honor the way that Jesus would call us to live economically. Third question that I want you to ask yourself is, are there ways in which I'm hurting others with the way I earn and spend that I cannot see or fully understand? We have a problem, all of us, that we cannot fix. You cannot come to the altar today, sort this out, and then never do it again. That is, we participate in an economic system, and it's hard to ever get our mind around what happens down the road of our spending and our participation. We participate in broken systems that we don't ever mean to participate in. Where does your fruit come from? Who's building your shoes? Who's mining what to make your cell phones? It's complicated to understand when we as a consumer get to the point that we buy something that we need in order to survive, to really track through or to trace back where it came from. One of the ways to talk about sin that I think is really helpful is that there are multiple different kinds of sin. The most common sin that we talk about is a transgression, or a sin that is properly so called, you might say. Sin properly so called. This is a known violation. God has told me not to do something. I do it. I have sinned. But there are other ways to think about sin as well that can really help build our prayer life as we seek, like, how much grace do we need from God? Well, we do things ourselves, this sin properly so called. But there are other sins that are talked about as well. One is original sin, and that we're born with this inclination towards sin, and we're tempted by sin on the regular. And we may say no, but that temptation grows and sits with us. We can pray for God's help in the sin that's born within us. But also there's this other kind of sin that I think is really, really helpful for us to think about in terms of economics. You might call it sin improperly so called, and that's an unintentional transgression. And that's just to say that we do things all day long that aren't right, that aren't perfect, that don't reflect heaven, that aren't God's good economy, that we don't mean to do. But just simply participating in an economic system like we have means that eventually we might buy something that started with slave labor, or we may purchase something that uses minerals that were taken as an act of war and then sold to us at a reasonable price. There are ways in which we participate in a broken economy that it's really hard for us to avoid. And so when we think about our economic life, it's worth us praying, seeking forgiveness for things that we don't intend to do, we're not trying to do, we're not trying to break God's law, but we participate in a fallen system. So that may be overwhelming to think, my goodness, I sin without even realizing I'm sinning. And so what can we do? What do we do about this problem? That we live in a world that bends us towards longing for wealth, and we participate in systems that are broken in which ways we can't even understand. And I would say to you, the most important thing you can do is to have some humility when it comes to the way in which you spend. I feel like across my lifetime, I just turned 44 last week, 44 years, I feel like we've gone as a Christian people further and further from humility, further and further from being a people of repentance, further and further of being a people who come before God asking for forgiveness, and more of a people who yell really loud to defend the way that we are. We want to log on to social media and get really aggressive about how awesome we are and to defend the way that we are rather than having a humble posture before God. And so some ways in which you could really change the way in which you participate in the economic world is to have some humility, to spend time in repentance, to confess before God, to pray, but then also make restitution. Find ways in which you can become more of a Christian when it comes to your money. Your money, your cash, your economic situation very quickly becomes a moral document. If you were to open up your PNC or whatever account today and look through how you spent, there is your perception of morality written out there in very, very clear terms. Jesus says, where your treasures are, there your heart will be also. If he were speaking in 2025, he might say, where your debit card has swiped, there your heart is also. And so, it seems to me the thing that we might want to be in response to all of this information is a people of generosity. Finding a way in which we aren't just accumulating so that we can spend on ourselves, but learning that in this world in which the way in which we earn and spend says something about our moral understanding of God, that generosity flowing out of us might be the best testimony that we might have to the world, to our children, to our friends, that we believe that God sees money differently than we do. Now, I'm not asking you to blow up your 401k, to put your years of retirement at risk. I'm not saying that saving isn't important. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a car. I'm not going at money here, but we do have to be very, very careful, I think, to believe that God is a God of blessing, who cares, who watches over us. We should ask ourselves, do we really believe that God watches over us, or do we believe that our savings watch over our future? And we can very, very quickly get in the place that we become financial hoarders because we trust in our ability to stash money away far more than we trust in God's ability to work through us, to transform others, to transform the world, to transform the church, to help other people. We are called to be a people of generosity. Because finally, we believe that God is a generous God. We expect God to be a generous God. We pray as if God is a generous God. And so one of the ways that we can really wrap our mind around an economic life, I think, is to begin to imagine what we think heaven will be like. One day, we testify that through the blood of Jesus, we will be saved eternally, and we will spend eternity with God. And when we begin to imagine what that day looks like, what eternity looks like, what God will do for us, we should begin to extrapolate that life back to where we are at this moment. Because we don't have to wait fully for God's kingdom to come. We know God. We know that God is at work. We know that God sees us and knows us now. So the way in which we anticipate heaven ought to be the way in which we live on a day-to-day basis as Christian people. And so this text ends with a call to simplicity, a call to generosity. And so I wanted to share with you, just as a way of heading out, something from Richard Foster, who's an author I really love. He's a spiritual author. He writes all sorts of incredible things about the life of Christian discipline, ways in which we can practice the Christian faith. And he writes 10 steps towards practicing simplicity that I think are good ways for us to walk out of this call for wealthy people, ways in which we can begin practicing the Christian faith in our life. 10 things, and then we'll close with this. Number 1, buy things for their usefulness rather than their status. Okay, I'm in trouble already. But that's a good advice. What would it look like for us to change away from trying to buy for status, but instead buy for usefulness? Number 2, reject anything that is producing an addiction in you. Good advice. Number 3, develop a habit of giving things away. Beautiful. Number 4, refuse to be propagandized by the custodians of modern gadgetry. I am in trouble again. Man. Number 5, learn to enjoy things without owning them. This one was really convicting to me. Learn to enjoy things without owning them. Number 6, develop a deeper appreciation for the creation. Beautiful. Number 7, look with a healthy skepticism at all buy now, pay later schemes. That's exceptional advice. Number 8, obey Jesus' instruction about plain, honest speech. Number 9, reject anything that breeds the oppression of others. That's a little bit of what I was talking about before. We don't always know what our money supports, but when we recognize that something breeds the oppression of others, reject that, avoid it. Number 10, shun anything that distracts you from seeking first the kingdom of God. These are beautiful and helpful tips, ways in which that we can step by step, practically, avoid the trappings of just chasing after money all the time. We all know that we'll get to the point that money means nothing. When you're in your deathbed, breathing your last, no one will care how much is in your bank account. Least of all, you. So if that's not what we're going to take with us, if that's not what's going to matter when we're struggling for life and breath, why should it matter when we're healthy and strong? Let's build our lives around the things that matter. Money is a tool. Money is a tool. It's a useful tool. But as soon as we allow it to become more than a tool, we've made an idol. And it seems to me that money is as easy an idolatry as we could possibly find in the world we live in. So let's be careful. Let's be simple. Let's be Christian when it comes to our relationship to money. Would you stand with me as we sing our final song of praise?